So one of the great things about live video is all of the energy that comes behind it, and you get to ask me questions as we go along. The problem is sometimes I forget what I'm supposed to be talking about. That's why I'm doing this little keto addendum here. So, as you recall, we talked about proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, right? Our three macronutrients. And I want to break down the carbohydrates a little bit more so that you understand really what it is that we're trying to avoid, because it sounds absurd, right? You can't eat fruit, and why, and what is going on here. And so I really want to make sure that this point is honed in a little bit better. So our carbohydrates encompasses a lot. Grains is one of our probably most popular carbohydrates in this country. That would include all of our wheat, our corn, rice, etc. And after that, we've got our legumes, so all of our beans. We've got our root veggies, so this would be our potatoes, carrots, sweet potatoes, beets, etc. Our pod veggies. Now, our pods probably fall under the legumes, but I also want to kind of separate them out and include our peas and beans, our soybeans, which kind of also falls under the legumes. Soybeans do. But in the terms of the keto idea and realm and what we're talking about here, I want you to kind of think about the pods being more starchier, right? They're going to have more carbohydrates. And then we've got our leafy and cruciferous veggies. Now I put a little nice star here because these are our all-star veggies. These are excellent, okay? After that, we've also got our fruits. And I'm going to talk about these side area in a second. We have our nuts, our seeds, and our sugar. Theoretically, any of these carbohydrates, we're going to be able to get sugar from. That's why I wrote it so big down here. Yes, it's going to be a lot harder to get sugar from kale as opposed to what we often get it from, which is actually beetroot and not sugarcane. But at the end of the day, this is what our body is looking for when we are a sugar burner as opposed to a fat burner. So what are the carbohydrates that we want to sort of really cut down, and what are the ones that we want to focus on and include? That's what we want to talk about, or what we want to know. So we don't want the grains, we don't want the legumes. The root veggies, we don't want. Now, there's a little gray area with carrots and beets. These, after you've adapted to keto, can be okay in moderation. But you want to stay away from the potatoes and sweet potatoes. Maybe use those as a carb up day when you are trying to intentionally get more carbohydrates in. Then our pod veggies, we do want to also decrease, especially initially. Afterwards, they could also be a little bit more in moderation. They can be handled and tolerated. Our leafy green and cruciferous vegetables, those you can pretty much almost have unlimitedly. Now, I say unlimitedly with the assumption that you really can't eat that much of them, because you definitely get your fill off of eating a salad, and that is probably enough for you for the day. If you're doing a keto diet and you have like a mix of a spinach and romaine, or a kale and romaine type salad, a nice big plate of it, that's could be your day's worth of green servings for the day. But these are really high in fiber. This is our leafy greens, or our arugulas, or spinach, Swiss chard, collard greens. We've also got the cruciferous family, so this is all of our brassicas as well, the broccoli, broccolini, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, etc. This is kind of like our all-star because they're super high in fiber and super nutrient dense, so you can get a lot of bang for your buck. Definitely want to include these when you're doing keto. This is where you're going to get a lot of your good fiber from, that helps you flush out excess cholesterol, which could be a concern for some people, absolutely. But everybody needs to have this healthy fiber in their diets anyways. And when I'm working with clients one-on-one, this is what we go to a lot of times. Okay, are you getting enough greens in your diet? Because if not, that's probably why you have all of these sugar cravings to begin with. You need this slower digestion. You need this nutrient-dense nutrition to help fuel you up. Okay, then we have our fruits. So the okay fruits that we can have in moderation are really our berries, the tart citrus, our cucumbers, our tomatoes. So yeah, cucumbers or tomatoes are technically fruits. Of course, we've also got the avocados and the coconuts in here, which are going to be our higher fat fruits. And I just didn't list them here because really they're under the macronutrient, they fall into the fat category as opposed to the carbohydrate category. So we've also got our nuts. So nuts are going to vary with their carbohydrate and fat proportions. And our best nuts for keto are going to be your macadamia, your pecans. Walnuts are also pretty good. Almonds are pretty good. But cashews and peanuts, not so much, which is interesting. So you do want to read those labels. And the first 2 weeks makes, probably the most difference when you're setting yourself up. But we're going to talk about that in a minute. We also have our seeds, right? Really high in fat, really high in fiber. So these are also really good for you. And that could be your hemp, your chia, and your flax seeds. Those are kind of the mainstays. When it comes to flax seeds, make sure that it's at least ground or milled or toasted before you consume it. Otherwise, your stomach cannot break open the flaxseed. So you're only going to be getting the benefits of the fiber, which is okay, but you won't be getting the benefits of the omega-3s. Your body can't open up and expose the flaxseed, the omega-3s. It's fine with the chia seeds and the hemp seeds. But like I said, so at the end of the day, right, all of these are going to convert to sugar, and that's why we want to aim for our high fibers, our berries, our tart citruses, which are going to be lower in sugars naturally. Cucumbers and tomatoes, they're okay, right? And then there's also other, vegetables, like what about bell peppers, right, and eggplants? Those are all, again, they're okay after you've sort of really gotten into the fat-adapted state. So one of the other benefits about keto that I just totally blew past before is that you can go on a grain-free, a gluten-free, a bean-free diet and not feel starved. So a lot of people, when they go gluten-free, they, instead of doing gluten, they do rice, right? So now everything is a rice flour cake or, rice bread or something like that. They switch out the carbohydrates. That's really not leading to, though, not always at least, leading to the desired benefits that you want from eliminating grains, which could be just eliminating lectins. That's lectins. Let me write that out. So lectins can be in a lot of our plant foods. They can also be in our meat foods as well, but especially in our grains, our beans, our nuts and seeds. But when people are allergic to gluten, they could also have other grain issues. So sometimes just removing gluten isn't the problem. But this could be a start for people. Going on a gluten-free diet, sort of transitioning into keto. So they're fueling their body with fat, satiating their body, eliminating the problem foods, which can often come from the grains, and go from there. Now, of course, as I said, lectins could also be in seeds, so this is another problem. But I do just wanted to point this out. This is a whole other issue. We're not talking about keto here. Now we're talking about like the next level of restriction, right? Where you can't eat our apples and bananas and pears on keto. But for some people, they've got a lot of inflammation, a lot of inflammatory issues, and the next level is necessary. Hopefully that's not the case for you, but that can happen with the lectins. Okay, so now I also want to mention cholesterol and inflammation. So, as I said, what we're now noticing, and I say we very vaguely, what sort of the functional nutrition realm is recognizing is that cholesterol isn't the real issue here. It is inflammation. So if you have high cholesterol, but you don't have inflammation, you have low C-reactive protein markers, for example, and all of the other sort of cardiovascular markers that we look for. If those numbers are low, if you're at low risk for cardiovascular disease in general, you have, good weight, your blood sugar is well maintained, etc., but your cholesterol is high, is that the issue? Is that an issue? Is that a flag for cardiovascular disease? No. What science now is showing is that you have to have the inflammation in order for cholesterol to really become an issue. And where does our inflammation come from? Well, one of the biggest ones is stress, and right up on that is sugar. Sugar and stress are probably our two biggest inflammatory issues. And ta-da, this is why we go back to keto, because we can cut out, you can eliminate your sugar cravings, you can eliminate, yes, grains can be whole grains, they can have high fiber, they can have B vitamins, etc. But at the end of the day, it still is high carbohydrates, and it's still going to lead you to be a sugar burner. And so when we can eliminate that, we can eliminate a lot of other issues. And for some people, that could be the inflammatory issues that are the underlying cause of their problems. One of the questions on the webinar, on the masterclass, was, can you do keto long term? So keto was, and I don't feel like I answered it adequately, so I do want to kind of brush over it again. Keto was sort of discovered or came from the 1940s when a cure for epilepsy was coming about, and the answer was the keto diet. So the brain gets starved. There's a lot going on with epilepsy. One of them being that it can't use glucose as well for energy, but it can use ketones. So that's pretty cool, right? And a lot of people will say, well, you can't do keto long term because your brain needs glucose. Well, that's not the case. The keto diet was invented, you could say, for the purposes of fueling the brain with an alternative fuel, something besides glucose. And the answer is ketones and the ketogenic diet. In terms of how long can you do this for is really going to be up to you. It's really a bio-individual answer, because everybody is different and we're all doing our thing for different reasons. I am doing keto because I just feel so much better doing it, and I'm so much happier not having to worry about what I'm going to be eating at lunch, and do I have to take a break, and am I going to have a snack with me when I'm hungry, because now I'm just not hungry. I can have my morning meal and I can have my evening meal and I'm done. And again, I can't stress enough, the energy is incredible. So if something shifts, if maybe in a year from now I start to notice that, gosh, I just don't have the same vibrancy that I felt before, maybe it is time to switch. This isn't something that I intended on really going on for the rest of my life, but now that I have been doing it, I'm really happy doing it. But there's really no clinical trials that say, hey, look, this is, totally what you should be doing long term, or this is totally safe to be doing long term, and that, people live long, healthy lives doing a ketogenic diet. There's not a ton of evidence out there other than anecdotal evidence, which is fine by me. So I just kind of wanted to say that, put that out there, that it's, however long you stay on it is really going to depend on you and your goals and how you feel and how your body is responding to it. How to start the ketogenic diet. Okay. How do you start? It's not complicated. This is the lazy way, right? So I told you, you got to clean out your refrigerator, clean out your cabinets of all of your high carbohydrate foods, and then you need to stock them with our high fat foods. Because at the end of the day, your daily goal, we're not counting calories, but the macronutrients for the first 2 or maybe 3 weeks, you want to get a good picture of. You want to have a good understanding of kind of a ballpark range. So we say 20 Okay, 20 grams of protein is about what you want to start with. 20 grams of carbohydrates. Okay, 20 grams of carbohydrates is about what you want to start with. You want your protein to be adequate. This is about, no real number here. It's going to be individualized. Your fats are going to make up the rest of your meal. So how do you calculate this? Well, figure out what is your ideal weight. So I gave you that calculation. Take your weight, your ideal weight, convert it to kilograms, and you can either leave it there or take off 10%. That's about how much protein that you want to start with. This is just your baseline. We're just establishing a starting point. Then you want your carbohydrates. Figure out your carbohydrate intake for a day. If you're going to be eating whatever it is you are going to choose to eat. So if you have avocado and an egg for breakfast, maybe 2 eggs, count that up just in the beginning. Figure out what those macronutrient contents are. Later on when you have a snack, what is the macronutrient contents? And then at dinner time, what's the macronutrient contents? And you only have to do this for a short period of time because you're going to get into a rhythm and you're going to figure out what is good for you, what's working for you, and what's not. The protein, so you got to calculate your protein threshold. Start with a base point. And then the rest of your calories are going to come from fat, as I said. So this is where you start. This is it. Do this for a week. Do this for 2 weeks. Maybe 3 weeks. You gotta, keep a tally sheet. But then what you should start to notice, is it working or is it not working? And then that's where we can tweak and we can refine and we can say, okay, are you really sticking to the 20 grams of carbohydrates or are you actually getting more? Let's take a look. Or are you really getting more protein than you actually need? Because your body's not going to store protein. So the excess is going to be converted into glucose. You don't want to have too much protein. And then the mistake that a lot of people make is that they don't get enough fat because they're still afraid to eat fat. Make sure you get enough fat in, okay? Now, that's the basis of it. It doesn't get much more complicated than that. Okay, so I want to talk about your fat cells for a quick second because I didn't talk about this before. So let's say this is your fat cell. This is your skin. We've got fat under here, your muscle fibers. Yay, okay. Your fat cells, so the Chinese and the Japanese, they eat, let's just say, they eat a lot of carbohydrates, right? And so a lot of people they'll look to that type of a diet and they'll say, well, that culture is getting away with eating a lot of carbohydrates and they're not fat. How come I have to cut out my carbohydrates? What's the deal? Well, there's this thing called insulin sensitivity. okay? And insulin resistance. That's the opposite of insulin sensitivity. Most Americans tend to be insulin resistant. That means that their pancreas, the pancreas here has to secrete a lot of what? Of insulin. So the pancreas is churning out all this insulin to get your fat cells to do what they're supposed to do, to get your mitochondria to do what they're supposed to do. And that is open up and store glucose. Okay? When you have excess energy, excess glucose in the form of glucose, your body wants to store it in these fat cells. And if they're not responding, your poor pancreas has to churn up the insulin. And this is how we become insulin resistant, okay? You don't want this to happen, because what happens is these fat cells become sort of bloated, okay? And instead of releasing glucose, when your body says, okay, now I could use some more energy, right? I'm not eating. Maybe it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You had a nice lunch. Now you sort of need to refuel and get through the rest of the day. But instead of relying on your body's fuel sources, which is what you're carrying around, you reach for a snack. You reach for a candy bar, some other food, and that's because your body is not releasing the stored energy. Okay? So this is our resistant model. Our sensitive model is, let's say, someone who is genetically gifted, okay? Their pancreas only has to secrete a little bit of insulin. And the cell responds. It says, oh, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to store this glucose. But now, now all the glucose has been stored, let's say. Your insulin can go away. It's done its job. And now, theoretically, when you need to rely on this energy source again, you can. However, the interesting thing, so I bring up the Chinese because the interesting thing is that, yes, they're not overweight, which means their fat cells are responding, but the incidence of diabetes has skyrocketed recently, and which means that they're still having blood sugar problems. That, yes, their fat cells are responding, but their blood sugar is still too high. Your body can only tolerate 1 teaspoon of sugar. 1 teaspoon of sugar in your blood is the maximum amount of sugar that you can have. And when you have more than that, like if you drink a soda or if you have a bowl of white rice, your pancreas has to secrete insulin to get rid of the excess. 1 can of Coca-Cola has 10 teaspoons of sugar in it. That is insane. So can you imagine how much work your pancreas has to do to get rid of that sugar? It's toxic in your blood, okay? So, just because the Chinese and these other cultures might look like they're getting away with eating a high carbohydrate diet, it still can be causing underlying damage that you don't see on the surface.